So like the case manager that was under the house that I worked at, so she had, that was not only her house, a group of individuals that she had five other houses, and in those other five other houses, there are five other people. So if you really think about it, she has like about 20, 25 people that she is overseeing. And that's a lot to figure out, you know, because all of them, they have varying degrees of what they want, what motivates them. But the thing is that I feel like it's also up to them to take the time and the effort to figure out what motivates them, what do they want. Like I know for her, I remember she would come to the house maybe, I don't know, twice a week and catch up with on the individuals, do things that they like to do, figure out like, okay, what motivates you, you know? And that's something that I'm like, like I know it takes a lot of effort on her part because that's not the only house that she visits, you know? But I
Yes.
feel like because she does that, she's able to cater to their needs better.
Exactly. And that's what in the kind of best practice literature around the support coordinator role, that is one of the best practice guidelines that they recommend is that support coordinators use motivational interview techniques to
Mm-hmm.
really elicit from their clients what their aspirations are, their life aspirations, their employment aspirations, and through that process help the individual get a little confidence in being able to articulate and then go after what they want, in a way that, you until you actually talk about it, the first step would be talking about it before you do anything else. You have to kind of identify it. So that makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and it seems like that it would be a kind of a necessary step to really make a big difference in your effectiveness as the case manager, because otherwise you are just you're just assuming. You might not know, and you're not going to really have, I guess, the same level of trust either with the individual. And trust seems to be another big um, factor in just having successful relationships. Would you say so with your students?
Oh yeah, for sure. I remember when I first started, I had a student, and with her, it took her, I want to say, because I met her in August, it took me the first half of the semester to get her comfortable enough where she felt like she could approach me and talk to me about various things. And, you know, and I think that comes with time as well, because you can't just expect like, oh, like they're going to just gel to me easily. You know, some students, they may do that. Others, it takes them a while. I know another one of mine, it took him a whole year to feel
Wow.
comfortable enough because like I would always push with homework and things like that. And that whole first year, he always would say like, okay, I can do the homework on myself. I can do it by myself. And I always told him like, don't hesitate to contact me. Like I am here to help you. And it wasn't until this year when he started approaching me and saying, can you please help me with this? You know,
Wow.
be
Yeah.
able, I think what comes down to it is to come to their level, come to where they feel comfortable and just spend time with your individuals and figure out their personality and what motivates them, their goals, their interests. And also, I would say pushing them a little bit out of their, well, at least like within their comfort zone. I know it might be uncomfortable in the beginning, but it will tremendously benefit them for the long run. I know I personally done that in the past, just doing little nudges here and there. And for one of my students, he, like what I said, it took him a whole year to make him feel comfortable to allow me to help him with homework, to the point now that he's motivated to do his homework, you know. And that's such a good sign because like a year ago, that was not where he was. And it was because like every time I met with him, I would just give him a little nudge, a little push. And I think once they, like the individuals, they see that, they start to appreciate you and your time a lot more. And just quality time, it speaks volume to them. Like it may not be in the moment, but in the long run, like.
So that's interesting, and I'm glad that you've articulated it really well. I think that's part of one of the challenges is that it's the desire to work is there, but the building blocks haven't been put in place for that person to be that successful, even though they want to work.
I mean, when are you going to allow someone to say, this is what's required? Person, because they've gotten 3 notes from me, or hey, I'm waiting for you, or I'm not going to do it, because these students are sometimes coming out of a setting where people have just felt sorry for them or said, just get them through.
Mm-hmm.
Give them the C. Give them the C. And so the kids wait. They have been trained to wait till they make you uncomfortable enough to just pass them.
Yes.
Or they're so much rewarded for that behavior because they end up with the C, even though they've been a little worried or gotten a lecture from mom or been called in. In the end, the C appears, so they get to go through. And so we've got to break that waiting, that, oh, you'll get it, I'll get it done. You know, the 2 girls that were doing their assignment on my Zoom, and I said, girls, and they're telling me this. I said, you think, but that they don't think that's abnormal.
Yeah. That's just that's their strategy.
Well, that's was
just what they've learned
where they were required to turn in a rough draft. So because I'm saying you guys can't put the letter I with a dot in the middle of a sentence if you think you're going on to college. And how their computers even doing that blows my mind. But see, so that attention to wanting to do your best. I'm not going to say attention to detail, because that can be a whole set of disabilities that are hard for people, but the attention to this is me. This reflects me. My made bed. I feel great getting in it tonight.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
The dentist told me how good my teeth look, and it's, that cause and effect.
Yeah.
They have power.
Yes, and trying to get them to that mindset,
so that they're in charge of them.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, I think that gets at the heart of a lot of what happens in transition, where there's the desire, but there's not the mindset, or there's a whole bunch of kind of coping strategies or mechanisms still in place that aren't going to fly in a job. They're just not. Right. And then it's not going to be a good experience for the new employee or for the employer. So it's, what do you see in terms of just, maybe this really wasn't on my question list, but on the employer side of things, what do you see as being maybe some of the issues or things that employers could do, or support coordinators could do working with employers, I guess, any part of that?
Perfect. And one thing I'm going to add to the last before, I think the term leave them wanting more would be a great way to look at this responsibility thing, because we want them to brush their teeth. We want them to make their bed. We want them to wake themselves up. We want them to go rake the yard. Okay, all that. But we also need to get them out experiencing what are the benefits when you are responsible. You get to go have lunch on the plaza. You get to spend extra time with your friend. You get more time on the gross game, which I don't think would be my last reward for this population. But if we could leave these young adults wanting more, so they would know that they had to work to get that more. What I see as the more for this group overall is the parents feel sorry for them and say, well, let's take them all the worlds of fun. It's not, well, you did this and this and this, and you've made half of the money that costs a Worlds of Fun ticket, so now we get to go, and they have a blast. So then they want to go again. Okay, well, this time you have to pay the whole ticket. They have to understand the concept of work isn't fun. but the rewards make you want more.
Yes. I
So
love
I'll
that.
end that, but
Yeah.
I think we got to leave these kids. That's why I did that whole, in my class, I did the whole, oh gosh, it's a passport. And I had them all have to do experiences, going to lunch with friends and get a stamp. You could go to the Renaissance Festival, that group I organized at the beginning of the year. Go to the writing lab. It's scary for them to ask for help. But, you know, those passports, we could create a passport for a young adult. And I'm putting myself as a we, acting like I'm a part. But, you know, there could be a fun passport to make these concepts fun for the family or for the student, that once they get the stamp or send the picture in or whatever, because cameras help us, if they fill this out, maybe the employment things let them do a free class on how to bake pumpkin bread. You know, a fun class.
Yes.
You know, which even though it's a fun class, we know they're learning executive function, following directions. You know, so leave them wanting more is what we got to get them to learn. You work, 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 you play. You work, 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 you play.
You know, it varies based on the individual. It'll vary a little bit. You know, we use the life course trajectory for all of our annual plans, and you know, a lot of times, especially working with older teens, you know, then they will share when we're going over that form, you know, what kind of job they would like. You know, short term, I want this job, but long term, I'd like to be this. So when that comes up, then usually I will probe a little more about, you know, well, why are you interested in this? What I find, especially with teens, is a lot of times they'll say they're interested in a certain job or occupation, and then I'll probe a little bit of like, well, why is that interesting? Or, you know, have you thought about what a day in the life though really looks like, being a teacher or being a police officer? And if I bring up sometimes some aspects of it that, you know, are just challenging, the multitasking and safety and, you know, lots of other things, because I know the client, and I, you know, sometimes it's good to bring up those things of what the day in the life would look like, and hey, maybe you should go interview a teacher or things like that. Sometimes it'll get their wheels turning, and it will help the whole team sometimes to just realize, you know, maybe Joey didn't want to be a teacher. Maybe he just wants to be around kids and help people, but he thinks being a teacher is the only job or the main job that you can do that. And so, you know, that's what I often do is when my clients are bringing up their employment interests, I just ask some more of those probing questions of why is that of interest to you? And, you know, well, have you thought about programs? Is there even a program near us that can offer the training that you'll need? And how are you going to pay for it? And, you know, it's kind of a delicate dance. We can't get too deep in our role, but I think it's important that we go there a little bit because, you know, sometimes just those next step questions aren't on the forefront, and it's helpful if we're bringing that up a little bit.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it has the added benefit of helping the teen learn to maybe think a little more critically about just choices and think through, you know, decisions and have a little bit more self-reflection, you know, around, oh, this sounds great, but let's dig a little deeper into what that actually would entail. And that's a kind of a learning opportunity, you know, right there.
So I've experienced a lot of motivation towards, you know, getting that own job and, you know, living on their own. So it's a lot of motivation and encouragement towards that. And a lot of students who I've worked with are for that, you know, but it's also, with me, it's also like, I would say in the field, it's not spoke about much, to where it's like we're really helping these individuals get these jobs. You know, it's like when you look out in the real world, it's like, you know, it's hard for them. How can I say this? It's
take your time. Take your time.
It's like, you know, students, they want to, but then it's also about, you know, going about getting it. And if the person who they're employing, if they would, you know, if they are willing to be patient and work with them, if that makes sense. Because I feel like, you know, we can get the student there, but if I don't want to set them up for disappointment, like say they go into a workplace, I'm gonna just give an example. I say they go into a restaurant, and we can use CJ in an example. So CJ, he goes and work in the restaurant, and everything is going well, but he's get looked at different because he has a disability, and so which makes him feel either have some mental health issues or this is what his bandwidth of actually being there to focus on everything that he needs to. So I would say, like, yes, there is a lot of motivation, but then with getting them out there, it's kind of still, challenging. Does that make sense?
It does. So if I'm hearing you, one issue is there's not a lack of motivation on the part of young people necessarily. They want to find work. They want to be employed because they see it as a path to independence, toward achieving more independence, which is important to them. But there needs to be more education on the employer side to maybe understand how best to support these types of employees. Maybe, is that part of it?
Well, generally speaking, what we really try to do is we have a time where they have to just kind of sit still, and we have them, we talk about self-awareness. And so we really have them write, and that's something that a lot of people were like, man, you're not going to be able to get them to sit still and just write. Well, they want to. Sometimes it starts out slow, but what happens is they start to write about who they are, what they believe, kind of what their values are, what is it that they want to do, with their life. And then even more than that, just writing down kind of what they're feeling. You know what I'm saying? What are some of the things that are holding you back? What are some of the things that you want help with dealing with that you feel like you can't deal with yourself?
As a young mom, not understanding, what the best ways were to help my daughter, because when that happens to a lot of us, we're kind of grasping at straws, because the community as a whole, dealing with children who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, we acquire a wealth of knowledge that we share with each other. But for whatever reasons, it doesn't seem that like it's public knowledge for most of the stuff. So, every person who's a young parent and it's their first time dealing with the kid with these needs, it almost feels like they have to reinvent the wheel until they find somebody else that they can lean on to provide them with the information. Part of me dealing with it was going back to school and studying psychology, which I graduated from UMKC with bachelor's in psychology. And now I work as an RBT, which is a registered behavioral technician. That's my part-time job, which is nice because I work specifically with children who have autism and intellectual developmental disabilities to teach them pro-social behaviors, self-care, and they're all assessed dependent on their need. There's other things, if we see that they're struggling with certain types of academic work, we can focus on that. But the facility that I work with, which is called Family First Centers for Autism, they actually have the kids come in, and as they're sitting there and they're manipulating the information however they need to be able to make it into something workable, that also, once they settle on, like, say, a schedule for the day, once they settle on it, they might have the relief of the fact that, okay, now it feels organized, I don't feel quite so disheveled, and then you can also introduce, like, okay, well, if you find that it's not working, we can tweak it a little bit here and there, just shuffle stuff around. But overall, this is workable, and you're not going to be as overwhelmed as you thought you were when everything was floating around in your head. It doesn't seem quite so big, So those things are very important, but you really have to draw that out of the person for them to care enough to actually do it. If you hand it to them, they've spent no cognitive energy on it at all. They may or may not actually read it. So it's really just getting them interested enough to participate. And once they are interested enough to participate, then they'll probably, like, you get them a mentor. I guess is really what I'm trying to articulate is if you handed them to the paper and you did the whole thing for them, it enables the inertia. You know? But by pulling them out, even if it's just a little bit at a time, you know, okay, well, like how long do you think that this class takes a day? If you were to not do your homework, like this massive paper in one day or over the weekend by procrastinating, how long do you think you would need to actually work on it every day to like get it done so that you're not actually stressed out? And they're like, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours a day. You know, okay, well, out of your 24 hours a day, what time of the day, one, are you available? And two, are you the most clear-headed? You know, and kind of start plugging things in around there. And then you can factor in your sleep and all the other stuff, you know, but kind of chunking stuff that way. But that it gets the ball rolling and it gets them thinking about problem solving. And so it's building up their momentum into actually wanting to follow through.
Thank you. That's a really great explanation. That's very helpful for me.
Well,
That makes perfect sense, and that really does.
I did a lot with my kids.
Really?
Yeah.
And that does make sense because you're not only are you teaching them problem solving skills, but there's sort of almost two levels happening where you're also giving them you're giving them the life skills to then carry into adulthood where they have the past experience. I was able to, you know, be successful in school. I can apply these same reasoning to my job situation, and I can kind of figure out what I need to do around that. And that makes perfect sense.
Those are very important because over time it'll generalize, like you were saying, where it's not just home, it's not just, you know, grades.
Yeah.
You know, you're gonna have to problem solve in anything. You know, and once you establish that they can successfully problem solve and they can get through it and then have that relief of getting it over with, and I'm like, oh my God, I did it. You know, because that's sometimes when we procrastinate, you know, just as an example, but we have avoidant behaviors because that's really what procrastination is. I don't want to do this assignment. I'm not going to do it. But then you wait till last minute and then you get it done and you turn it in like 2 seconds before it's due. And you have like all these endorphins and like, oh my God, I did it. And but that's actually reinforcing, you know? So it reinforces the bad behavior.
Yeah.
So you have to implement something else that's more productive and then doesn't condone those kind of behaviors. Being proactive needs to also be rewarding. And that's where sometimes too, you're going to have to look at what motivates the person that you're working with. And just as like from a therapeutic point of view, or even as parents, right? A lot of our kids are into tech. They want their screen time. They want to play with the iPad. They want to play with the laptop. They want to play a game. So depending on whether or not your kid transitions well or not in between things, then you can use those as your rewards. You know, okay, so we're going to do 20 minutes of homework. You can have 10 minutes of tech afterwards. And then when you're done with that, then you can do another 20 minutes of work so that they're actually working for their time. And that helps build their work ethic too, without you having to worry about like allowance if you don't have the extra money kind of situation to give them. Plus some kids don't care about money yet because they don't know the value of it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that motivates them is a reward. So
yes.
You reward them offering the behavior or them being compliant first with the behavior that you want with something that they like. So then that would be positive reinforcement. And even though a lot of times we look at it as a clinical type of thing, we do this to each other all the time in our social interactions with people. So if we can use a little bit of that problem solving skill to sit back and like look at our situation where like in a clinical setting, we would look at the ABCs of a situation. Are you familiar with that?
A little bit, yeah.
The antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is, even though we don't really teach this to parents, I think that it's something as parents and students and, you know, us joining the workforce, it's a really great exercise to use to help us problem solve our situations where, you know, we can start to make different changes in like our own behavior that causes the changes that we need to see in other situations. So like for an example with let's see. Okay, well, I'll just use my daughter because she's the closest example. But she really does not like math at all. She struggles with it because she has a hard time just with the concept of stuff. So all of the math that she's learning, she really just has to do as rote memory, kind of. You know, so, but whenever I'm like, okay, well, it's time to do math. And then also too, she's in 9th grade, they're starting to introduce algebra in the form of word problems, but she has a hard time extrapolating the information from the paragraphs to figure out what the actual question is asking her. So there's probably at least 10 minutes of non-compliant behavior prior to actually doing the homework, you know? And then once I get her to do it, she was like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then she has her break, you know, but, you know, in the past, it may have like ended up in an argument because I'm like, well, you have to do it. And she's like, well, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. You know, and the obstinate behavior, then it's kind of like Clash of the Titans. And it's both people trying to enforce their will. And so we're both digging our heels in, and then it just turns into her still not doing the behavior that I needed her to do. Right. And whether, you know, and this applies to bosses too, because like, how do we get the behaviors that we want from our employees? Do we lord it over them? They'd be like, you have to do it because I said you have to do it. And they're like, yeah, I don't really care, you know? And then so we just don't, you know? But if you present it in a way that motivates you to want to do it, you know, then you're more willing to offer up the behavior that they're expecting. So like keeping notes on the ABCs. If a situation didn't go the way that you had hoped it would, you're like, okay, well, what do I think is what triggered the behavior that I didn't like the obstinance? You know, what exactly about what I was doing or that was in her environment that triggered her to react that way to what it was that I needed her to do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what behavior looked like, you know, and then what was the consequence of the behavior? Did she get punished? Did we get an argument? Did she end up still not doing her homework, which kind of reinforced the behavior because it was avoidant to start with? You know, so stuff like that. And then if you actually just keep like a notebook or write it out on some scratch paper, because sometimes when we get it out of our head, we can take the feelings out, you know?
Yeah,
and
so true.
Outcome. And when it's on paper, you're like, oh, I see what happened. And then we can kind of like, okay, well, next time I'm going to try this instead. And then you just keep notes until like, okay, well, maybe that didn't work. I'll try it a little bit different next time. And then eventually you get to a point where you're like, you have something that works and it works with them. It may not work with somebody else, you know, because each person is different and we have different motivators, but I'm like, okay, she's responsive to that. I'm going to keep going with that until it doesn't work anymore. And then I'll just tweak it as I need to. And that's an important skill, but I don't think that we're always taught that or not explicitly taught it.
No.
You know, we're kind of like pick it up inherently over the years, but to deliberately do that, I think is very important.
That's such a good point. That is a technique. That's not something that you would know to do the first time or the 5th time or the 10th. You might find yourself locked in a battle of the wills with your child or whoever for a long time before you ever could kind of apply that and get through it, you know? So that makes perfect sense. That I think that would be something that, again, is, you know, a technique that's borrowed from the world of psychology and can be applied, you know, as a behavioral technique, and it could be a suggestion or, you know, something that gets included in discussions with, you know, support coordinators and parents and children, you know, as just general advice or general, you know, kind of suggestions. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.